feel, it feels like, must be the Pope or something talking behind, plexiglass or what have you.
Did y'all hear that they quarantined the 4th grade of a?
It feels like, must be the quarantine the 4th grade of which?
Many things going. Sorry about that.
You said that somebody quarantined the 4th grade of?
There was a quarantine at one of the schools that's opened today.
Okay. Yeah. No,
So protocols are going to be important to know.
Yes.
Well, on a happier note, the Canes are up 2-0.
All right, good afternoon to everyone. It looks like by my count, everyone is here. So I want to say welcome to everyone to our work session today with County Board of Education. Glad everyone is here and that it is nice and sunny and no evidence of a hurricane or tropical storm that just passed by yesterday. So glad we're all here and it looks like everyone is safe and has power and all that good stuff. So glad of that. We've got one item on the agenda for today. Is always our meetings, if you will, of agenda items, and that is the update on the reopening of schools. So we'll get started on that. There's always lots of information and lots of questions. So we do want to try to get through the presentation and the slides. I see a good number of hands. We'll try to stop after we get through a chunk or two, but it is my goal to try to move us through the presentations and then entertain questions. So if you've got a burning question, need for me to stop, again, use our chat, our feature, raise the hand feature, and I'll stop and call on you. But if not, we'll try to breeze through and entertain questions at the end. So with that being said, we'll get started. I'll turn over to Superintendent Moore. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Sutton and board members. We're going to begin this afternoon. I see the presentation is being pulled up, and I'll open the first couple of slides and then we'll move into the presenters that will be with us this afternoon. So we're pleased to share with you this afternoon a review of the many preparations that are currently underway for the school year that is almost upon us. Before we begin, I do want to give you a little sense of how today's presentation is organized. So first, lots of our previous presentations have been sort of organized by topics, specific buckets of places of information. Today's information is meant to provide parents and school leaders and those who are watching, as well as the board members, information that's needed to understand not only the decisions that have been made to date, but a roadmap for some of the decisions that are to come. So it's organized a little bit differently. We will provide context for the preparations that began in late May, show you how teachers are preparing today for their return, what the first 2 weeks of school may look like for the school year, and that begins August 17th for our traditional students, not just for staff, but also for students. One point that I'd like to make now that will be expanded upon later is that a teacher return to school, the school building, will happen in a phased approach that's likely to take at least the first quarter. During this time, teachers do have the opportunity to either come into the school building following the required health and safety guidelines, or to ask to telework during the phase-in period. So long as a teacher is able to complete required tasks from the telework site, that request will be granted. This presentation will last about an hour, which should leave us about another hour for questions and discussion. Moving on, while one could argue that the beginning of this coming school year was defined by the abrupt closing of all school buildings in March, a more direct line is actually going to be able to be drawn from the hours of planning that began in late May. The culmination of that first phase of work was the plan that this board approved on July 2nd. This first phase of work literally redesigned the school district as we left the spring of 2020 behind. The framework for those changes are summarized in a return to campus guide that's found online and offers staff and family important details. I strongly encourage families to bookmark wcpss.net because that is the first place that updates will always be posted, and that return to campus guide is continuously updated. Also in May, we began developing intentional strategies around the use of Wake Connect, which is our intranet for internal communications. Wake Connect is a one-stop shop of resources for our employees, especially during this pandemic. It contains a range of items from the practical, such as pay stubs or leave forms, to materials just for teachers, such as instructional guides and professional learning opportunities. This is a structured go-to site for teachers and employees to find the resources that will help them in their respective job duties in the coming days, weeks, and months. So again, both the Wake Connect site for our intranet, internal communications, and then the return to campus guide for our families and the community. Kelly Creech, our Director of Health Services, will now provide further insight into some of the ways in which we are preparing for reopening.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore. Good afternoon, Chair Sutton and members of the board. To continue, our district's redesign also launched an intense focus on acquiring and distributing nearly 1 million face coverings, thousands of digital thermometers, gloves, and much more. As of today, we have acquired or ordered more than $3 million worth of personal protective equipment and other health-related supplies to help keep staff and students safe. While we're on the topic of keeping the workplace safe, I want to acknowledge the many questions about hand sanitizer. We are acquiring more than 20,000 gallons of hand sanitizer to begin the school year, but we can never stress enough the importance of regular and routine hand washing. So in addition to dozens of hand sanitizer dispensers and bottles spread throughout every school, we will have plenty of soap and water available for frequent hand washing. Along with face coverings, frequently washing your hands remains one of the key preventative measures recommended by health officials. Safety signage has been designed to foster healthy habits that slow the spread of COVID-19, including signage about hand washing, avoiding groups, and maintaining safe distance from each other. Particular attention was paid to ensure the signs were designed to be understood even by our youngest students, and that the images used reflect the beautiful diversity found in our student body. The signage arrived in our warehouse last week, and the signs were delivered to the schools this week. They'll be posted as teachers begin to arrive so they can support a culture of personal health responsibilities on all of our school campuses. Social distancing and minimizing exposures are key in decreasing the spread of COVID-19. Schools will incorporate many strategies to meet this goal. like discontinuing activities that involve bringing large groups of students together, altering traffic patterns through buildings to minimize exposure in the hallways, and seating students all facing the same direction in classrooms. Each school has information specific to their building blueprint to help them arrange furniture and design new learning spaces that promote social distancing. This photo was taken at Northridge Elementary. It demonstrates how furniture can be used to create space between students, especially when we have smaller classroom size that Plan B transition accommodates. We're in the process of finalizing our protocols for cleaning and disinfecting school transportation vehicles and school campuses. During the summer, staff have been working to deep clean all buildings and buses. That work will continue as we begin to open our campuses for staff. We're also in the process of acquiring additional supplies to support the level of frequency required to thoroughly clean and disinfect common areas and regularly touch surfaces like door handles, bus seats, handrails, desks, and restrooms. We're finalizing these cleaning protocols with regard to schedule, process, and products. Thank you for the time to share these important updates to our preparation for reopening. Now, Drew Cook, Assistant Superintendent of Academics, will share further information around our learning and teaching plans and support as we prepare for our students.
Thank you, Kelly, and good afternoon, Chair Sutton, Superintendent Moore, and members of the board. It is a pleasure to be back with you again today to share additional information and important updates on our district's ongoing plans for opening the 2021 school year. As we think back just 6 weeks or so ago, it's amazing to consider how much has happened in such a short amount of time in many different aspects of our work. And the Virtual Academy certainly qualifies as one of those examples. I think it's pretty safe to say that the interest level in the Virtual Academy has exceeded all expectations. As of this meeting, more than 82,000 students have been accepted into the Virtual Academy for either the fall semester or the full school year. That's slightly more than half of our student population in the Wake County Public School System. It is worth noting that the roughly 50% split held steady across nearly every school, grade level, and region, with the exception of students in the northwest corner of the county where enrollment was higher. A detailed breakdown by school will be released when the final verifications are cross-referenced against power schools over the next couple of days. While it's obvious there would be no virtual academy had there been no pandemic, we also believe the enrollment numbers suggest our families understand what we have said repeatedly. The Virtual Academy will deliver sound and challenging instruction that will redefine their remote learning experiences. Families have started receiving notification of their students' acceptance status just within the past few days. All families should receive notification by this week. We ask that families please contact their building principal if they've not yet received confirmation by the end of this week. Schools will be sending additional information to Virtual Academy students during the next couple of weeks. As we continue to live and work in an era of ongoing change and uncertainty, we cannot underestimate the value of the social, emotional, and mental health and well-being of our staff and our students. The support that we provide through social and emotional learning, or SEL, will be critical this year, to say the least. Never has there been a more important time for us to help staff and students manage emotions and set positive goals for themselves and their relationship with others. To accomplish this, we have created a staff behavioral health professional learning and resource guide. This will assist employees in acquiring the training, resources, and tools they will need to help them during this pandemic. Professional learning lessons will also be delivered and offered daily via instructor-led webinars. Also, a self-paced course is being developed for our Learning Central professional learning site. It is important to note that this is available for all staff, both instructional and non-instructional. Social emotional learning is not confined to a single class or even set of classes. It is a process. However, specific programs do exist to strengthen targeted skills. The Community Resiliency Model, or CREM, is a program that addresses self-awareness, specifically emotional self-awareness, self-management, and responsible decision-making through a collection of intentional strategies. The district has produced videos and other materials that will help our employees tap into these strengths to help them build their social emotional wellness during this time. And we encourage our teachers and staff to take full advantage of this valuable resource. It is important to point out, we are not naive enough to think that these resources alone will be enough to overcome all of the complex challenges that our teachers and staff are and will be facing. And obviously there are many, but we do believe that every little bit can help move us forward in the right direction. As is often the case in our profession, best practice in supporting the success and well-being of students can also be best practice in doing the same for adults. Put simply, we must practice what we preach in this area, as it's vital that our teachers and staff feel the same level of support, encouragement, and respect from their leadership that they are expected to give to their students and families every single day. They need and deserve no less, and we will remain committed to meeting that need and expectation in the weeks and months ahead. While district leaders have been working diligently to redesign school operations over the summer, many of our teachers have also been working very hard to refashion how learning will happen. The difference, of course, I might point out, is that our teachers who have been doing this have been doing it largely off the clock and often on their own time. So what does it mean to be an effective teacher during a pandemic? Our teachers are working hard to figure this out every day. Many have already spent hours in guided conversations that look very much like the video clip you see here. It has been an intense and time-consuming effort for those who have begun the process. So to the degree possible, it's important to provide a sense of how much time and effort our educators have already invested in building capacity to support online instruction for our Plan B transition classes and for the Wake County Public School System Virtual Academy. Since March, more than 10,000 staff members have completed coursework in Kite Learning, which is a resource we provide that houses hundreds of short online training courses on how to use a myriad of digital tools for instruction. Many teachers have also completed courses in Canvas that are more comprehensive and tailored to our specific needs in Wake County. Those course offerings have included both instructional strategies for teaching in an online environment, such as the Introduction to Digital Learning or Introduction to Remote Learning courses, as well as many content and level-specific courses, such as the courses titled Using Instructional Technology to Implement the Wake County Public School System K-12 Vision for Science Education. Many also participated in 25 lunch and learn and office hour sessions, along with 9 podcasts by the end of the 1920 school year. In addition, dozens of newsletters and other resources have been shared with teachers to improve expertise in the virtual space. Our current focus puts a priority on learning for teachers, including optional and required sessions. The goal is to provide more than 10,000 teachers multiple opportunities to build capacity by providing easy access to content, ensuring them as much flexibility as is possible in their training. What initially began as informal and ad hoc discussions about remote learning in March has now grown into robust district offerings to support professional learning teams this fall in the virtual environment. This includes, but is not limited to, book studies, support hours, courses, and toolkits. We continue to seek and provide these and other resources for teachers. Approximately 8,000 educators have accessed professional learning team structures and supports offered by the Office of Professional Learning. As a collaborative effort among the teams from Digital Learning and Libraries, the Office of Professional Learning, and Academic Advancement, we have created 4 professional learning courses for teachers to build their capacity in blended and online instruction. These 4 courses, which launched last week, are fairly self-explanatory in their titles. They include Designing a Blended and Online Learning Environment, Instructional Design in a Blended Online Learning Environment, Communicating with Students and Families in a Blended Online Learning Environment, and feedback and assessment in a blended online learning environment. You can see the breakdown here of the topics contained within the modules of each of these courses, as well as the length of the course. A conversation guide accompanies each course and can be used by PLTs to plan for blended and online instruction and reflect on practices throughout the school year. There are also administrators' guides for building leaders that include guidance for instructional coaching, implications for principals, and additional resources for reference. In creating these courses, we receive feedback from departments from across central services, as well as teachers and principals, to ensure we are providing professional learning that best supports our staff. We want our efforts to provide support to actually feel like just that, support. If it doesn't feel like support, but instead feels like another superficial hoop to jump through that only creates more work, then we end up with an unintentional disconnect that could actually become counterproductive. And all of our people are working too hard and care too much for us to allow that to happen. All instructional staff, including the appropriate central services staff, will be required to complete these courses by the end of the first month of instruction. As was mentioned in a work session a couple of weeks ago, teachers are also being provided an overview of the academic standards that students missed and how to cover that material this coming semester in a way that bridges last year's courses to this year's courses. Additional support is also being created to help teachers address learning loss from the spring, which will of course vary greatly among our students. There are a wealth of resources available to our educators in Wake Connect and through Learning Central and Canvas on this topic. As you can see from the video now playing, staff at both the school district and school building have been developing dozens of resources to support teaching and learning across all three learning environments. A sample of the resources seen here include documents on how to adjust pacing based on the new instructional calendars, assessment items to gauge students' initial understanding, interactive digital lessons and slides for teachers and students, guidance on how to support collaboration in a virtual environment, and also additional curriculum resources regarding how to support learning gaps due to missed instruction. Since these are course and/or grade level specific, teachers can find them embedded in the Canvas course they use in Learning Central, on the Wake Connect Preparing Our Students site, or in our weekly all-staff messages. Teachers and school-based employees will also use this time to engage in professional learning around new health guidelines. On Wake Connect, employees can access training videos around healthy hygiene, using personal protective equipment, using the new touchless thermometers, and more. There's additional material specific for new COVID-19 coordinators, so those individuals can be aligned in how they support their school communities. The goal is to have our students safely return to the classroom as soon as is possible, and to use the valuable and very limited time that teachers have to prepare efficiently. One of the areas of our district's health guidelines that will no doubt require the most effort is the new health screening. Teams that include central services staff and school-based staff have been working to safely employ the extensive guidance provided for health screening on school campuses. Each campus layout is different, so schools will use this time to adapt the guidance to fit their unique communities. School-based staff will be practicing the new process and will craft plans to ensure that students are screened quickly. We have successfully completed a walkthrough at Vernon Malone College and Career Academy using the new touchless thermometers as of last Friday. This step takes a bit of time to master, but it is important in keeping students and staff safe. The extra time we take now will produce faster and safer screening when our students return to schools in person. This brings us to our plan for safely returning staff to the workplace, part of which Superintendent Moore referenced in her opening comments. We've developed a phased return plan for staff that focuses on providing a safe environment for instructional staff to return to work that adheres to health and safety guidelines, such as no large groups more than 10 people, wearing face coverings at all times, social distancing, regular hand washing, and others. This begins with buildings and campuses being open on the first workday to allow teachers and staff appropriate time and planning for the 2-week orientation, which will encompass virtual meet and greets, collection and distribution of instructional supplies and materials, PLT team instructional planning, and other activities that may involve the need for some form of on-site activity. Principals will provide all certified staff and instructional assistants every opportunity to report to the building so they can begin the important work of preparing for the school year. During this time, principals will put structures in place to create an environment in which staff members feel comfortable and safe. These structures may include additional social distancing measures or modified work schedules. Alternative space may be also identified for an employee to work in the building or arrange for additional cleaning of their workspace. Employees will be working with their supervisors during this phase-in time to transition back to their work site. Importantly, this will include both school-based personnel and central services staff, which will be operating within the same parameters and phased timeline. If site modifications are not enough to allow an employee to feel comfortable returning, supervisors can and will allow the employee to telework until the end of the phase-in period, so long as it is possible for the employee to complete their work from home. This process will be completed by the end of the first quarter of the traditional calendar, by which time all staff members will have returned to the workplace, have an approved accommodation request or job modification request to telework from HR or taken leave. The goal is to be able to transition to in-person instruction as soon as is safely possible, perhaps by the beginning of the second quarter, with a prioritized scheduling of students returning by cohorts. In addition, this plan acknowledges that many of our teachers will choose to work additional time in advance of the approved work days to prepare for the school year. To support that work, we are providing teachers with teacher workday exchange leave. For each day worked during a specific time period prior to their first scheduled workday, teachers will receive a special leave day called workday exchange. This leave may be used later in the year on work days during which teachers are permitted to take leave. As with any planning that we do these days, this represents an overview of our phased return to work plan based on what we know right now. Changing circumstances may, of course, cause us to adjust the timeline or phase in parameters as needed. As we work to ensure teachers have access to curriculum resources and instructional tools to support their work, we know that PLTs, professional learning teams, will play a significant role. Staff will be onboarded with guidelines, expectations, tools, and resources to support their work. It is important for all of us to recognize that a key part of providing staff the time they need for this type of work involves providing supervision for their own children. Through August the 17th, the children of staff members may take advantage of existing programs offered by the YMCA of the Triangle at no cost to employees. After that date, supervision for most school-age children of employees will move to our school campuses. Numerous providers have agreed to participate in a community effort known as the FAST initiative, which stands for Families and Students Together, to address childcare needs for families not employed by the Wake County Public School System. At its core, FAST is simply a way to make sure staff and families can access free or affordable supervision for their children, where part of each day is set aside for academics. This is absolutely critical to improve the quality of remote learning for the 2021 school year. As of today, providers such as the YMCA of the Triangle, Boys and Girls Club, Marbles, the town of Cary, and the city of Raleigh, some private providers, and the school district have all identified space for about 10,000 children. Later this week, a website will be published by Wake Ed Partnership, another important member of this initiative, where families can find links to programs throughout the county offering childcare options. Thank you for allowing me this time to provide deeper insight into the ways we're preparing for our students. At this time, I'll turn it over to Cedric Williams, Area Superintendent for the Northwestern area, who will provide an overview of the first 2 weeks of school. Mr. Williams.
Thank you there, Drew Cook. I appreciate it. Superintendent Moore, Chair Sutton, and members of the board. Hello to all of you. We would like to shift the focus at this point to the time period when school actually begins. We very much look forward to reconnecting with our families. We miss our students. I know I have one at home who definitely misses being able to collaborate with classmates. Our 2-week orientation for schools will have significant flexibility and ownership over how they use their orientation time. The goal for each school, however, is the same. They are to use this time to establish expectation of students for online instruction. And I think that's definitely very important to remember and to mention. There is no restriction on exactly when instruction can begin during these 2-week time periods. So parents will need to pay close attention to messages from their child's school for specifics. At a minimum, though, each school will be required to provide 2 to 3 hours of live online instruction beginning with week 3. In many schools, live online instruction will begin during the first 2 weeks of school and will increase with time. Any materials that need to be distributed to students will begin during the 2-week orientation period with, of course, safety guidelines in mind. This will be a time for teachers to fully engage families so that they will feel comfortable with the information and resources they have to make sure their child gets off to a solid start for the school year. We are keenly aware how difficult this transition is for students entering a new grade span, especially those entering kindergarten. While the district has obviously set standards and expectations for every school, the bond between teachers and student is what makes K-12 unique, education unique. Despite the challenges this pandemic presents for those specific grade levels, we are confident that once parents meet their teachers virtually or physically, they will know they have made the right choice for their child. So the 2-week orientation is designed for all students, regardless of whether they are attending in Plan B transition or the Wake County Public School System Virtual Academy. The orientation period will include the same types of information and activities as presented in school before the pandemic. It also will include a review of the student handbook, information around how parents can best communicate with teachers and principals, and support for students who might not yet have devices for online learning. With this next slide, as you can see, the principal in the video, we know that parents have many questions and concerns about how school is going to look for their children this year. They also are interested in learning how they can best support learning during this time. To answer these and other questions, schools are actively working to orientate families to the instructional resources and digital tools that are available. Many schools will remind parents, as we did earlier in this presentation, to familiarize themselves with the Wake County Public School System Return to Campus website at wcpss.net. And many schools are hosting virtual open houses and school tours, similar to the video shown on the slide, to engage parents and allow them time to learn about their child's school and to ask questions. In many ways, these goals during the first 2 weeks are the same as they have always been for school. The difference, of course, is this year almost all of it will be done virtually. During the opening weeks of Plan B transition, schools will focus on the activities of finding, connecting, and identifying students and families. We know that returning to school is a significant transition for our students and families and staff who have been operating outside of a traditional school setting since March. And these areas serve as focal points for our attention and strategy. While all of us will be mindful of and eager to start instruction, and engaging students in the learning process, we also know that we must be attentive to laying a solid foundation of support for our students. Diving immediately into instruction will not serve students and teachers well if we have not properly set a foundation by orientating students, renewing connections with our students and families, and providing students and staff the social and emotional support required to teach and learn. So most of our professional learning teams will be meeting at least once a week to plan for the upcoming school year. The teams are meeting so they can plan for common assessments for students, address any potential learning gaps that students might have, share best practices in virtual delivery to make sure all students are engaged in learning, and discuss ways to bolster family communication and engagement. As guidance and resources are being given to school teams, creating behavioral health and reopening plans for each school, we are also providing resources to support schools in assessing students' needs. Each school will have the ability to review school level, grade level, student subgroups, and individual student data points such as attendance, basic needs, and more. Equipping schools to support students with transition into the school year, building relationships, and teaching social emotional behavior and health and wellness expectations in the return to school increases the likelihood that students will have a positive start to the school year and lead to improved student outcomes. Also, it is very important for students and parents to know that the online school day will be just that, school. With the advent of COVID last spring, schools throughout the nation were unsure what to do next. In North Carolina, the guidance was to be very flexible when it came to completing and grading assignments. Over the past 5 months, however, we have worked hard to build capacity around the delivery of quality instruction, both live and recorded. The provision of resources for students to access in completing their assignments, and the expectation among staff, students, and families alike that high-level learning will happen. The resources we are able to provide will help teachers to meet the high level of expectations for students and families. So what are those expectations? Students will take their learning as seriously as if they were in the school building. Attendance will be taken regularly in both online learning and the virtual academy. In the virtual academy, families will need to provide support as outlined and explained during the application period. We're counting on our teachers, support staff, students, and families to take this into account as they make assignments, provide solid instruction, and complete assignments as if they were in the school building. In other words, school is happening. Expectations are high, good teaching will be delivered, and meaningful learning will be the rule, not the exception. Okay, so one obvious way that a new approach will be apparent is the use of a more consistent learning management system for Plan B transition and the Wake County Public School System Virtual Academy students. In response to feedback from families from remote learning in the spring, the district has narrowed the number of learning management systems to 2. The 2 learning management systems in 2021, the school district supports are Google Classroom for pre-K through grade 2, and Google Classrooms or Canvas for grades 3 through 12. All students have a teacher of record, which students often think of as their homeroom teacher or just their regular teacher, depending on the grade level and subject. The teacher of record, of course, or section will post regular updates and resources that support the learning objectives for students in the online learning management system. In collaboration with their principal, teachers will choose either Google Classroom or Canvas. Many teachers and families are also familiar with Seesaw, which can be embedded in Google Classroom as opposed to being a standalone system. While it is recommended that schools adopt an LMS that is consistent across the school, it would not be required until 2021-2022 school year. So we understand the need for one LMS. We also understand and account for our teachers having coursework and lessons within different platforms prior to this school year. The amount of time and work to move that coursework into a platform is extensive. And we want to give teachers the time they need to transition to a single platform. Therefore, principals and teachers will choose either of the district supported systems, but may not vary outside of those two options. During the 2020-2021 school year, we have sought to balance the need to create a more consistent LMS in the district with a realistic timeline between sharing this guidance and the start of the school year. We also heard loudly and clearly from parents that we need to streamline support for technology so that students can spend more time learning the content and less time learning the technology. We're launching a new website, Guides to Technology, that provides a one-stop shop for students and parents who need tech support. The site is designed to be seamless and cohesive, providing step-by-step help on the topics that are asked about the most. The site is designed to be accessible by everyone: children, adults, people who speak language other than English, and people with visual or hearing impairments. It also links to our help desk phone support, which will also be available to families this school year, so that if families can't find what they're looking for, they can give us a call. The site can be found at wcpss.net.techguides. Also, in order to have devices and hotspots available to our students, we will begin additional distribution on August 17th. There will be 5 distribution centers: Leesville Road High School, Knightdale High School, South Garner High School, Apex High School, and Enlow High School. In order to provide social distancing and keep our families, staff, and volunteers safe, we will assign families a date for when they are able to come to our distribution center. They can come that date or any date after the one assigned. They will be able to pick up devices and hotspots from for any students requested in their family when they arrive. Interpretation services will be available as well. So distribution centers will be available Monday, Tuesday, Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 o'clock p.m. Then that Wednesday and Thursday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. But once again, families should receive a time in which you should come, and thereafter you can come any day after that. As mentioned briefly in another part of this presentation, behavioral health support is a very, vital piece of a smooth start to the new school year, especially this year. Noteworthy programs for the beginning of that first semester include virtual Meet the Teacher sessions, social stories to support younger and special needs students in understanding the changes in school this fall, and parent and student information sessions for students new to the school. Building and establishing strong relationships between and among teachers, students, and families is critical. This will include class meetings, student check-ins, and allowing time for students to connect with one another. Teaching and supporting online learning expectations include creating virtual learning classroom norms and considering online specific behaviors that might need to be explicitly taught. We are all clearly aware that this is not school the way it used to be or the way we want it. But it is worth repeating that this is not the remote learning experience of spring. It will require time to launch the new school year correctly. It will be more challenging for both the students and the teachers, and it will be even more rewarding. We can't wait to get started. So thank you for this opportunity to review some of our goals for the first 2 weeks of school. I will now turn it over to Superintendent Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. So a couple of quick points sort of to close today with. I think it's important, as there's been a lot of information shared, a lot of background, a lot of the runway and the groundwork that's being laid to try to be ready for reopening whenever our students are able to return, and the work that's happening now at the opening of the school year for both our teachers and our families and students. It's important to acknowledge in all of this, especially to the teachers and the staff and building, that we understand that the work to reopen schools has generated more questions and concerns that we can adequately address. We know that this work is new work, right? The reopening of schools has no playbook, no manual. None of this has been done before. And we are busy working to create support structures and to include and message flexibility in all that we do. And we know that there still remain questions and concerns, and we will continue to address those. I do think it's important to mention again that the Wake Connect site has a lot of resources for teachers and staff. And if you find that something is not adequately addressed or that additional questions are needed or clarification, please let us know. We are continually updating that website and want to make sure that we have a place for our folks to go to get answers to their commonly asked questions, but also to make sure that we continue to improve it as things change or additional information is needed. It's important to note that the district is not sacrificing the health of any staff member in our work as we move forward. We've provided a long runway for phasing back into schools that does provide teachers and staff choice. And we also know that that runway may shift at some point before us. It's important to continue to review three things as we prepare to reopen schools. We must continue to monitor state and community health metrics. We must ensure that for staff and student return, that the necessary PPE and safety protocols are in hand and established. And we want to ensure that staff have had time to return to buildings, to engage in and feel comfortable with the health and safety protocols and be ready for students. You know, speaking specifically about how we monitor state and community metrics, there's been a lot of discussion around that because you know, as superintendents, we are educational experts. We are not medical doctors. And so in order to look forward at how we can make really good decisions with what's happening in our community and really understand it, WCPSS is planning to establish what's probably going to be known as something like a COVID Scientific Advisory Board. And this is really very similar to hospital advisory boards that exist already. Or data safety monitoring boards. These are folks who bring a particular expertise and understanding about research and metrics. It is a partnership that will likely occur with local health organizations. And they serve sort of in an advisory capacity and meet regularly with staff. They advise staff and board around what the metrics are, what the data says, policy changes that may be needed, how we educate our teachers, our community, staffs around what's important. They follow the research trends and the data that's occurring because we know that with COVID-19, there is something new almost every week. So we're really looking forward to WCPSS being a part of this group. It is, you know, it is not the only one in the area. There are some local districts that are also standing up a COVID Scientific Advisory Board. And so we look forward to being a part of that group. It's early in its organization right now, and we will be providing more information to the board at our next work session. So we're looking forward to doing that. At this time, if there are questions or comments, I'd like to turn it over to Chair Sutton, and we've got lots of folks that are online that can help answer questions.
All right, Superintendent Moore and staff for the presentation. Certainly appreciate it, and especially the detail around the reopening plans, what the first 2 weeks of orientation will look like, and especially the work around the health and safety of our students, but especially our teachers and employees, and what that would look like. There have been lots of questions and concerns, especially in our email boxes over the last few days, about what that would look like from our teachers and staff and employees. And so I appreciate, as I'm sure my colleagues do, on the other information to help ensure the safety of our teachers and the ability to telework and work from home, and what those options are as we look to them coming back into the building. With that, got a couple of hands, and I'm sure others will come up as we get started. I saw Mrs. Scott's hand first, and then Ms. Kushner's after that, and then I'll go to Mr. Fletcher and Mrs. Cash. So Ms. Scott, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think all of that information was extremely helpful, and I appreciate that. And so my first question is for Superintendent Moore. With this advisory board, the creation of that, does that mean there could be a potential change to when we do start bringing students back in? But does that potential exist?
So I think that what we know is that we're not ready for school to open for students right now. It's why we're in the Plan B transition that we're in. And we also know that really trying to pinpoint how to make that decision requires collaboration and expertise that also resides outside the district. So certainly changes could happen. And we're hopeful that by collaborating with local health organizations and others who are more day-to-day involved in the work of the data and the metrics, that will help inform how we make decisions and that can guide us better. So there is certainly possible that there are changes before us. We have to have the flexibility to move back and forth to a full C or an A when that time is ready. And we want to make sure that as we make those decisions, that we are listening to and have the support of other folks in the community that can really help us make them well.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. I think one of the reasons why I was asking that is for working parents who are depending on some of the private entities that are doing, offering camps and things. They do have to pay for those, in ahead of time, of course, if they have to do a 4-week chunk or a 9-week chunk. And so I think that's been, as this board is developed, I hope that we can just try to give parents a little bit better idea, which I know that's all we long for. We all long for a better idea of something, but I just wanted to, I know that's been considered, but I did want to bring that up because I've been hearing from parents about that. If they could have just like a set time. So I look forward to the information from that. Thank you, Superintendent Moore. I just had a few other questions regarding the tech pickup. Device pickup at the different schools. I'm sure there is the potential for transportation being an issue. I do appreciate that there are multiple days and times of day that families can go, but is there the potential to work with any of our community partners to help with transportation for families who might need it?
Thank you, Ms. Scott. What I will say is certainly we are also working closely with our transportation department as we did in the spring to make deliveries to families who are not able to get out.
Great. That is perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
And is this just Chromebooks, or does this also include hotspots if they're needed or requested?
It is. It includes both.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much for that. And then the last 2 questions I had were for when we're looking at what students are accessing for virtual academy and or remote learning. For the classes that will be live, Is there an option? Has it been decided yet? Has there been guidance for teachers yet? For families who might have multiple children accessing their internet, which can put a little bit of a strain on bandwidth. Is there an expectation for these courses to also be recorded so that students could access them after the fact, or are students going to be expected, if there is a live instruction happening, they have to be accessing it at that time?
So I'll take this, and if Mr. Cook would like to jump in with this as well, I'll also certainly tee that up for him as well. So we cannot legally have live instruction recorded where it has student info, like where the students are visible or can be heard on a recording. It creates multiple public records, educational records. And so what our guidance has been, which has been sent out to staff this week, actually I think it was sent out last week, they have a document about live instruction, how that looks, how it should be done. So our suggestion, there are a variety of things from pre-recorded videos to lots of other selections that they've had, and I'd have to defer to Mr. Cook on all the different options that they were given. But technically, we've asked that no video of live instruction, no recordings be done of that to prevent student records for multiple reasons.
So then in that case, if a student were to miss that live session, it would be perhaps handled similar to if they were just absent from school, if they happen to miss that class.
Correct.
Okay.
It may be handled through office hours. It may be handled through small group instructional settings. It also could be something that was worked out with the teacher and the student on how to make up that work.
Okay, thank you for that. And then related to that with live stream, has there been guidance to whether or not students are expected to turn on their cameras? I know the Google, a teacher brought up a very good point that students could be concerned about their background, or just be concerned where they live. I know I've been, mortified myself sometimes when I realize something, something in the kitchen was in the background of a meeting. But for some students, that can absolutely be a sensitive concern. And I don't know if there's been guidance to, as long as you can hear them, are cameras required to be turned on?
Cameras are not required to be on. In fact, the advice that we've been given is that teachers and principals, whoever is interacting with students, should not be requiring a camera to come on. Certainly, if they're on this, they can access the voice, but a camera is not required.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. And then I'm sorry, Chair Sutton, I just had one more question. This is not technology related necessarily, but I was just curious about the additional advice that's been given to our singleton teachers in terms of how much success we've had, or if that's still being looked at for balancing their remote students who are starting the school year remotely versus the virtual academy students, and what that might look like for a teacher who is the only teacher of that subject matter at their school site.
So, Ms. Scott, I think in general terms, first of all, I do think that schools are still in the process with all of our most recent virtual academy data just kind of being finalized within the last few days of working through the details of what those schedules look like. And certainly, I think we know that our principals are working with singleton teachers in their buildings. As we've discussed before, I think a lot of times that means teachers in the fine arts and performing arts and other elective courses, which are unique. And so I do know that our schools and our principals are working with teachers, many of whom I think it's important to point out, as you might imagine, whether it's in chorus or band or other kind of elective offerings like that, have expressed a desire to be able to continue teaching students, whether they're in the virtual academy or whether they're in the Plan B transition cohort. And so I think there are some circumstances where teachers and principals are working through exactly what that looks like. But as you might expect, we're hearing, particularly from our arts teachers, a strong desire to find a way to be able to manage the learning needs of their students in both environments, at least early as we start the school year in a fully online environment. Obviously, if and when we do transition to in-person learning at some point in time, that becomes a much trickier proposition to have to work through. But right now, I think it's safe to say that our schools are working through that, and are working hard to find creative ways to meet the needs of their students, but also recognize that our teachers can only do so much in a given day in a given amount of time, even though we have heard loud and clear from many of them that they want to be able to keep, especially when it's a program, right? Whether it's dance or chorus or band or drama or other things where they might be the only teacher in the building. As you might imagine, there's a strong desire among those teachers to keep those students with them. And so schools are working through that as we speak.
Thank you for that. And thank you again to everyone for this presentation. I want to emphasize that I understand that things are always changing, they're always ongoing. And I do appreciate the answers to the questions that I had today. Thank you, Chair Sutton.
Thank you. And I should say at the beginning, I appreciate the timeliness. We got a lot of board members that have questions, of course, several questions. So I'm going to try to hold you to about 6 to 8 minutes per board member so that everyone gets an opportunity to get the questions out. I want to thank staff, as you all did just then. If you hear the question and a topic, go ahead and pop on your screen so that you can come on and give a nice, concise answer to each board member so that we can move through and get to everyone. So again, I'm going to call them names as I saw the hands come up. Ms. Kushner, you were up next.
Thank you, Chair Sutton, and hello to all my colleagues and the superintendent's leadership team. And thank you for that information. It was a lot to take in. So one of my questions is, how are we going to communicate, instead of making Mr. Cook go through his timeline and targets again, how are we going to communicate with our parents and staff some of the information that was presented in the last hour? I don't know who wants to take that.
Well, I think everything that's been presented in the last hour, so our principals have received the briefing this morning. They have a copy of the presentation. Anything specific around expectations for teachers for the 2-week orientation, requesting accommodation to telework was sent to teachers last Friday. So today, if they are listening, hopefully it's clarification and not new. Everything, I believe that everything we've shared, with the exception of standing up that COVID scientific task force, which is really late breaking, has been already provided to staff.
Well, I think you're wise to point them into the direction of Wake Connect for our staff. That has a lot of information that I think will be very helpful, as well as to the website, because I think y'all have been doing a great job updating all of that. So, and I applaud the task force. I think that's going to be helpful, helping us make some of these decisions. Immersion program to 3 immersion programs, elementary and then middle school with language immersion. Will that be handled? There's some concern about that being remote. Are we working to participate to have access to teachers who can remotely do that immersion curriculum? I don't know if Mr. Martin is on the line.
Ms. Kushner, you were breaking up a little bit. Can you try your question part of your question one more time?
There she is. I see Wade Martin popped on because of the participate question. I think the question is for our immersion schools and teachers that we may get from participate, how up to speed they are on being able to do this work remotely. I'll let Wade go.
That's a great question, Ms. Kushner and Chair Sutton. Good afternoon, board members. I would share with you that the staff of our magnet office has been working closely with each of our magnet schools, especially our immersion schools, in developing a plan. Up to this point, most of that has been tentative because of the unknowns of how many students were going to sign up for the virtual academy and how many were going to remain in the Plan B transition. So I would share with you that as each of the schools now have those hard and fast numbers and are really working to lock in that schedule, a number of staff members from the Magnet office has been working again with each school directly, because the unique needs of each school are so different. So there's not a one size fits all plan for how we're going to utilize our participate teachers in these unique opportunities where those aren't really elective teachers, because they're teaching that core instruction in that dual language. So again, I know that specifically with regard to Oberlin Middle School, with the additional positions that they gained this year, they're working through some challenges because one of the additional teachers has not been able to join the staff as of yet. So they're working through that unique situation to resolve the needs to offer certain courses as that staff person comes online. So again, we're working with each school directly.
Thank you for that response, Mr. Martin. Ms. Kushner, are you with us? I think we've lost her because I don't see her camera or microphone. But we'll come back to her once she gets on and keep her time. Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question I think I know the answer to, but it needs to be part of the record here. It is my understanding that we must adhere to the class size limits that the legislature passed as we organize schools this year. Is that correct?
I'll go ahead and take a stab at that because I've actually been working on it. So you are correct. It has been communicated to us from the Department of Public Instruction via an interpretation from the legal staff at the legislature that even for a virtual academy, that K-3 class sizes remain in effect. There's nothing that exempt those students or those classes from having to maintain the class sizes that have been established in law. However, there is a waiver process that exists now when those classes go over those limits. So we are looking into whether or not that waiver process will allow us some flexibility based on a process that already exists. We just don't have the answers to that yet, but the general to the waiver process. But the answer to your initial question is yes, class size limits for the virtual programs within our schools do apply for K-3.
All right, thank you very much. Have we determined when we will be determining the cohort size? Are we 2 cohorts, 3 cohorts? What are we planning, and when will we know? It's my understanding that principals really can't organize their schools and assign teachers until they have the cohorts identified. So when will that, I know there's a decision process that has to be made in terms of if we've calculated the capacity of every building to accommodate social distancing. Principals have that information. We know now how many children are expected to participate in Plan B transition. So at what point will we be able to determine the cohort makeup that will drive transportation and teacher assignment and whatnot, classroom assignments?
Mr. Fletcher, I can try to provide you with some answers there. Assuming that we are staying with the 3 cohort rotation, which is certainly the recommendation of our principals at this time, we shared with principals today that they would be able to access those cohort rotations, at least the ones that were developed centrally, tomorrow. And so what we've done is we have developed the level assigned cohorts for those students who are bus riders, and also worked to ensure that students who live in the same household are assigned to the same cohort. From there, schools will need to take the remaining students, the non-virtual academy, non-bus riders, students without siblings in other schools, and assign them in such a way as to what benefits their instructional program there to be able to balance that out. So they'll have that initial data from us tomorrow.
Does the attractiveness of the virtual academy reduce our population to the point where 2 cohorts are possible as opposed to 3? That would cut the childcare issues for families in half.
So, Mr. Fletcher, I'm happy. That's a great question, and it's really important, and one we've talked about and really, I think, worked hard around for the last couple of weeks. I think in general terms, certainly having 50% of the students enrolled in a virtual academy helps. It helps primarily with transportation, where you've immediately reduced the number of students on a school bus. It also certainly helps in terms of minimizing the number of students that are in a building for a given day. One of the things, though, that we recognize, and one of the pieces of data that our principals are working through and have been now, is the reality that if, let's say, for example, half of a school have their students enroll in the virtual academy, which is about what the district average is. So if there are 2,000 students in the school and 200 teachers, essentially what we're doing with 1,000 students is we're assigning 100 teachers with those students. So the teachers go with the students virtually. And what that leaves behind is essentially the other 100 teachers to teach in person the other 1,000 students. And so there's more space in the building, but we don't have additional teachers to be able to bring down the relative student-teacher ratio class size-wise. And so certainly the large enrollments in the virtual academy help us in some areas when it comes to the number of kids in a building. It does not necessarily change the ratio of students in front of the teacher in a classroom. And that's why right now we are communicating to our principals to go ahead and plan and prepare at this early stage for the 3 cohort tiers, as has been communicated now for several weeks. And obviously, we can consider adjustments as circumstances evolve. I think it's also important to point out it has taken transportation weeks of work to develop those 3 evenly balanced tiers based on what their routes are. And so there's a multi-week process that would need to occur if we did consider, to your question, a 50-50 cohort model. And so that's just in a nutshell, I think, one of the challenges that we face, even despite the large numbers of virtual academy enrollments.
I appreciate that. I would think we would be closer to having space and teachers equalized at elementary than at high school. So, all right, let me ask I think there's opportunity for us if that winds up being something that works out, where we could have 2 cohorts as opposed to 3. That's an observation and a point of view. Is there any effort? Now, we've talked about the singleton classes and how they might have students from 2 different schools sharing a teacher. Is there any effort to look at that at lower grade levels? If 2 schools are both having to have a combo 1-2 class because of the numbers and the class size limitations, is there any thought of allowing them the opportunity to share a teacher and students between schools so they can have a full 1 class and a full 2 class made up of students from 2 different buildings? I guess that becomes a problem when they rotate into the building. So long as they're in remote learning, it's feasible.
Afternoon, Mr. Fletcher. I'll address that question, and certainly Mr. Cook can add on anything that he would like, but it is certainly an option, and the area superintendents are supporting principals if they need to look at having students essentially what we call cross enroll, right? And so that could potentially happen at the elementary school level just as it may happen occasionally at the middle and high school level. So certainly something that we are keeping on the table as a possibility.
All right, thank you very much. I know we've got creative principals and they're working hard to find solutions to the unique things that are happening in their buildings. The Superintendent Moore, there's not an answer to this yet, but I assume that one of the charges to the COVID advisory group will be to identify a target infection rate that then would enable discussions about re-engaging more students in the building.
I'm pretty sure from my knowledge, my preliminary knowledge of how this works, that is part of the data that gets reviewed. I don't know that it's a single data point, but I think that is certainly one of them. The infection rate, the prevalence in the community, hospitalizations, all of that is part of it.
Thank you very much. And I'll just say this, we've got 10,000 wonderful teachers. And we are asking them to take the personal responsibility to rethink school, to access the tools that the district has prepared in terms of how to rethink and re-engineer your business of being a teacher so that you can be more effective and help students do the same. And I just want to applaud our teachers for their response to this awesome responsibility, where they will continue to be the people who make it happen for our children, and applaud them for their effort in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Appreciate the time. Mrs. Cash, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. First of all, Superintendent Moore and the not. So it shows patient and what you've been. Thank you for that. One of the questions I had is for our young children, parents have asked for in-hand materials for their classes since virtual or online learning is a little harder for the K-2 environment. Will that be things that they can have access to, and how would they get those?
Ms. Cash, thank you for the question. I think the general answer is yes. Our intent is and needs to be that, especially as you reference for our younger students, we want to be able to provide manipulatives and hard copy materials, workbooks, and those kinds of things to students. And that's actually part of what we envision, one of the goals of the 2-week orientation period being, where we would work to set up opportunities for material pickup. Things that we, as you'll recall, we did not have the luxury of doing in our first iteration of remote learning. And so I do think that we're going to need to provide opportunities for children to have materials that allow them to learn outside of the virtual environment. And Michelle Woodson, who is our K-12 Senior Director for Curriculum, is also on, and she may have additional details to share in that regard, particularly when it comes to the elementary grades.
Good afternoon, Ms. Cash. I just wanted to reiterate pretty much what Mr. Cook had already shared. We will have a lot of instructional resources to be able to provide to students really at all grade levels, but also specifically for those young children. We are going to look at provide some math manipulative kits in addition to some additional resources for their learning with Letterland. So we are working to make that happen, as well as schools are already coordinating those activities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I know you'll do a good job of that.
Ms. Cash, if I could just add one piece to your question was, and we will figure out a way to get that stuff to the kids who aren't able to, for example, come to school to pick it up.
Okay, I have no doubt about that either. You guys have done a good job of that. Okay, thank you for that. Second question is, if I say I'm a working parent and I have a kindergartner that's coming into the school, and I do not have access to go into the Y, Marbles, Boys and Girls Clubs, or any of the facilities that are actually working with us right now on childcare for working parents, and say they go to a community care center or maybe a home care center, or they're home with their siblings. How will that child, since they won't be online very likely during the day, how will they establish, say your kindergartner will establish a relationship with their teacher? There may not, I mean, that is a hard one, and I don't know that, I'm sure that each school and each teacher will have all kinds of creative ways to do that. I have no doubt. I was just wondering if expecting that to probably be a part of the relationship building for K2. You know, I just kind of worry about those kids that are in situations where maybe they're being watched by their sibling. For them to get a relationship with their teacher might be tough.
Cash, I'm going to try to jump in on that. I do know that our social workers are going to be doing a really focused work in the beginning of what's called a due diligence checklist to locate students that we may have concerns about in situations like you just expressed, or students that we don't connect with immediately. So that's going to be really critical. And also our counselors and Paul Coe and his team are working very hard to support registration, again, reaching out to students and office hours initially to make sure that we can connect with those students. And so part of it is just making sure that the school connects initially, and then we can find out what the next steps would have to entail.
Okay, that's good. Thank you so much. You know, kindergartens are always very excited about seeing their teacher online or somewhere, so that's a good experience for them. One last question. We do get a lot of information and concerns from our teacher population, and as other board members have said, we value them greatly. If even though I do believe our principals is a good place for all to happen under our principals in each school. I think that's a good place for the decisions and the communication between staff to happen. If there are employees or staff or teachers that are not really totally happy with what their principal school, and they may say it's not consistent with what the county has said, what is where do we refer them to, or how do we where do they call next? Or
I can take that, Ms. Cash. Kind of depends on the issue. Sometimes an area superintendent is a good person to go to next, but a lot of times it's also HR is why I'm chiming in now, especially if it's with the comfort level of coming back to the school. But we have been working with principals to just ensure that they have what they need to be able to work with their teachers, so that teachers don't feel like they are in that situation. But certainly if they do have concerns, they can reach out to HR, and we can help from that end as well.
okay, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all.
And just adding to that, Ms. Cash, I think anytime as we hear from our teachers, we want to, try as best we can to refer them to the appropriate sort of chain of command, if you will, and starting with their principal, and then up to the areas, as Mr. Matillo said, and then of course HR, if they don't get any resolution to their issues at that point. So thank you for that question. Dr. Martin, you're up next, sir.
Thank you. Let me begin by really applauding this creation of the Health and Science Advisory Committee. I think that's a very good idea. Trying to make sure that we have professionals who actually understand and are paying attention to the research and the data to help us make decisions, I think is a very wise thing to do. So I want to very much applaud that. And I think the community will find it very useful in establishing metrics for making decisions. And Mr. Cook, I'd also like to thank you for emphasizing in your comments the need to, for lack of a better term, to be real for our teachers. Because if we just create what seems to be boxes to check that don't really, provide the useful information in the classroom that actually can be counterintuitive. And I also appreciated your emphasizing the need for us to pay attention to the social and emotional well-being of our staff. And I think we cannot reinforce enough that our teachers need to feel the same empathy and respect that we talk about as being important for building relationships with our students. So I just want to thank you for emphasizing that. I think that is absolutely critical. I want to pick up just a little bit at Ms. Cash's last question was also one of my questions. I appreciate the discussion about maybe where to refer people, but I really appreciate what I heard today. What I heard was pretty clearly a teacher's request to telework will be granted so long as it is possible to do the work remotely. I think that is an appropriate standard for the district. At the same time, I have to acknowledge that that does not seem to be what I have been hearing from several teachers. So I appreciated Dr. Matillo's recognition there, but and I'm not quite sure, question or not, but we're getting inconsistency. So what can the district do to look into this inconsistency that we hear being reported?
So Dr. Martin, I was pretty intentional with how I said that at the beginning of the meeting. And I sent it to all of the chief officers to share with all of the principals, to share with all the area superintendents, to share with all the principals, because they need to understand how explicit we are being in that language. So, we know that there are teachers that are listening now, and we want to pass that message along on. It is when you miss the opportunity to be explicit and you need to be explicit that sometimes this confusion occurs. So that's what we're working on right now, is being explicit with specific language that gets passed all the way through the chain.
Thank you. And I agree with you. I think being explicit is going to be our success to make sure that we can move forward effectively. I also wanted to pick up, Mr. Fletcher asked a bit about the cohort issue. My question on the cohort issue is, it sounds like the cohort, when it is safe to return, is heavily being driven by transportation. But I'm curious, well, from a teaching perspective, my gut tells me that the 2 cohort that Mr. Fletcher was talking about would be a little more practical for a teacher than the 3 cohort. But secondly, when thinking about cohorts to return, I wonder about the idea that, we've already talked about the spec ed cohort as possibly being one of the first to return. But when we look at the general education cohort, are we planning for just everybody based on transportation districts? Or are we thinking about, for example, transition grades like K, 6, and 9, or maybe our seniors? Is there a prioritization, or are we really just going to let the cohort be defined by transportation?
Dr. Martin, I'll take that one. I think one of the most important aspects for us is to also think about safety and health when we return to the building. And one thing that we've heard loud and clear from our teachers and principals is that a slow roll in positions them in a much better place to be able to teach folks, students, the processes and procedures for entering, to understand the signage, to make sure that all of the requirements are in place to ensure the most safe and secure day with regard to health and safety. So where we start is not necessarily where we end. It very potentially could start in a 3 cohort model, and then within a rotation or 2, we could potentially moved into a 2 cohort. So it's not completely driven by transportation, but it's certainly a start. And we want to be open to returning as many students as soon as possible, but we also want to make sure that we can do it in the safest way possible.
And I appreciate, I mean, safety has to come first, and quality of education, I think, has to come second. Related to the protocols for return, I appreciate that there was sort of a run-through trial, sort of measuring temperatures. What's check-in going to look like? Do we know yet who are the staff that we're planning to assign to do that work? Because I roughly figure 10 seconds per person, for what, 200 people, that's roughly 30-ish minutes. So it's going to take a fair number of staff to do any kind of a check-in. So have we decided yet sort of who is going to get that assignment?
Again, who are you meaning? What positions in the building?
Right. Again, as people know, my ongoing question is making sure that we protect instructional staff so that they can focus on instruction. But unfortunately, bodies in the building are going to have to do the work that bodies have to do. So that's where I just, I want us to be intentional as to, who's going to be doing the work.
So, Dr. Martin, I think it's important to understand that, in each school is going to be unique and different with regard to, its culture for how students arrive at school, the numbers, how many students are enrolled in the virtual program, which right now, Virtual Academy stands at about 50% with each school. Give or take, but we also have to think who's available and what's appropriate at each school. And so, we certainly understand that instruction needs to occur, and our emphasis is always going to be to have our teachers in the classroom. But knowing, what the requirements may be in the beginning will, adjust our response. And, what we, again, do in the beginning may not be, once kids are used to the transitions and parents understand, it's just like any opening of school. Lunch is always a problem with folks getting in the first couple of weeks, and, people making it to their classes on time, and the arriving at school on time. So I know that we will have some of that in the beginning, but again, we want to make it as smooth as possible, and we want to make sure that we're not just relying on only our teachers. And the last thing I'll say to that, Dr. Martin, is a point that you had made earlier. One of the things that I think communications is really working hard to do is to make sure that whatever we're sending principals and the principal webinar, and when we talk with you, the board, in the information we're sending teachers, we try to be very transparent and send the exact same information. And we are trying to do that with more often now, rather than just once a week, but at least every other day, and sometimes every day, so that they in essence get the same information at about the same time as principals, so that we can start to break down some of this communication barriers if they exist.
Yeah, thank you. Guidance and consistency, I think, are going to be extremely important on this.
So, Dr. Martin, if I can hold you there, let me get some other opportunity for some other board members to share. And if we've got some additional time, I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Haggerty.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sutton. I do appreciate it. I'll be brief. I did want to come back to 2 points, and I also wanted to just get a clarification on something really quickly. First, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the steps taken to provide some consistent district-wide guidance on accommodations and remote learning. We talk about all of these issues at the board level, at a very high level, from a very high level vantage. And then I know that there's a lot of individual decisions made at different schools, but I think it's very important, and I appreciate your recognition of this and the steps to make sure that, we're doing the right thing by everyone. no matter where in the district that they work. I also want to applaud you on this idea of the creation of the scientific task force. I think Mr. Fletcher was right on point about this. You know, looking at the benchmarks and the targets for our community health are so important. One of the things that's been incredibly frustrating through this entire process as we try to operate has been all of our guidance, local, state, and national, tells us to take all of these specific precautions, but never tell us, you know, for how long or what the benchmark is. They leave it open with statements like, based on community spread. And when you ask, well, what is a safe level of spread? What does that mean? You never get any specifics back. And so I hope if we can empanel this experts, and if this is one of the data points they look at about what is safe for our community, I think that'll answer a lot of people's questions and really assist us with our planning. So again, I think this answers a lot of big questions and helps focus a lot of our work. But the question that I have is, and I don't know if Ms. who on staff would be the best one to direct it, but I want to make sure I understand where we are with the virtual academy and instruction, because I heard some things today in some of the answers to some questions that threw me off a little bit. So I think everyone will be in remote instruction during the initial transition weeks in the first half of the semester under Plan B transition or virtual academy, if I understand it correctly. But then when there is a division between virtual academy and Plan B transition, with students returning to school, I want to make sure I understand. Will it be that some teachers will be assigned to the virtual academy only and others will be assigned to the Plan B transition students only? Or will they have responsibilities for both? And then it also sounded like there might be some exceptions, like with arts or band or some electives. Can someone help me with that?
So can I more, if that's Mr. Williams.
Yeah, they just all popped up. So there you go.
Mr. Hegarty was referencing Mr. Cook's comments earlier, so I wanted to give Mr. Cook a chance to come back and provide additional information, and certainly he can do that after I do. So, Mr. Hegarty, to your question, I think going back to Mr. Cook's response earlier, there will be some variation on how that is done by school. And he's spoken specifically in the context of singleton courses where there may be situations where teachers really want to keep all their students, if you will, in their programs. And so principals are really working with those teachers to see how that can be done. And so, I mean, the answer to your question is it really does depend on the creative work that principals are doing at the school level to schedule students, while at the same time making sure students are receiving the courses that they signed up for and that teachers are able to maintain the programs that they work so hard to create and keep successful.
I appreciate that, Dr. Thompson. So does this, and you may have already answered the question, but I'm going to answer it anyway, just to make sure that I understand it correctly. So we've talked about the singleton courses. Do you envision something similar with special ed, or would there be a division between special ed students in a virtual academy versus the special ed students in Plan B instruction? Or would they have the same teachers regardless of which, it's not a cohort, but which option they chose? Or do we know?
Again, you know, whether the students, I don't know that whether the student is special ed, certainly it impacts the scheduling process. But some of the students for special ed in terms of scheduling may only have one teacher for the virtual academy students, while there's another teacher designated for the Plan B transition students. But it does depend, again, on each school, each set of circumstances, the percentage of students in virtual academy and the teacher resources available. And so, you know, principals have parameters to use for how they do the scheduling. And then there are site-based decisions made based on that variety of factors that are present in each of our schools.
Okay. I guess in one of the earlier explanations when we talked about space in schools, we had talked about, you know, just because we have a large number of students enrolled in the virtual academy, it doesn't necessarily allow us to bring more cohorts of students back into the building necessarily, because you might have smaller classes that are spread out more, but you don't necessarily have more teachers. And so, you know, if you had a class of 20 and it's been, or 30, however, and you've split it and you have some that are taking the classes virtually, some that might be back in the building, you still have to space those students out. And so you would only have a certain number of students assigned to each teacher. But then if they were also teaching those in school, those face-to-face students and teaching students in the virtual academy, I guess, and I was thinking more for regular, you know, it's traditional instruction as opposed to more elective instruction. I was having a hard time following that, but I think I see your point that we have so many different classes and there's so many different permutations of possible schedules that we really just can't answer that question one way or the other. It would have to be, I guess, a case by case scenario. Is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. Haggerty, I would just echo what Dr. Thompson has explained, and I think you just hit on it essentially. There are so many variables and variations that from a master scheduling standpoint, principals have to account for. So I think what you just described is one of the reasons why it is such a complex process to determine what that best in-person model looks like in terms of returning students back into the classroom. And so right now, we've taken, I think, the more conservative approach in sticking with the 3 cohorts. And as has been articulated a little while ago, if we see by and large that we have a runway to be able to be more aggressive in that approach, I think we'll take advantage of that. But to your point, it's not going to be clean in terms of a district-wide approach, no matter what we do, if it's going to be a cohort model.
Right. And I mean, I can appreciate and understand that complexity, and we'll accept that and do the best we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Ms. Mahaffey.
Hello, and thank you. Most of our colleagues, Chair Sutton have asked a lot of my questions. I appreciate staff addressing what the building environment will look like as far as signage, sharing information for teacher supports. One question that I had that I don't need an answer to at the moment, but as we're moving forward, is for material pickup while we're in a remote environment, would that be possible to look at yellow bus distribution of materials?
I think that may actually be something that we would have to look at. I think we'll have to see each teacher, each classroom, each school, what the prevalence is, what the options are in the building. And there may not be enough social workers or others to go around. We may need to exercise something more comprehensive. We'll certainly look at it.
Okay, because I know our younger students, you know, need those physical pieces as well, but I'm sure our older students, as they go through novels and different labs, may also require that. So thank you, I appreciate that. Those are my questions, Mr. Sutton.
Oh, well, thank you, Ms. Mahaffey, for ceding so much of your time. Ms. Johnson-Hostler.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton, and everyone for your hard work. Very similar to my colleague, Ms. Mahaffey. Several of my questions were asked and answered, so I only have 2 that I don't think we've touched on. And one of them is, and I think this is for Mr. Matillo, have we at all given any guidance to the way that we'll use substitute teachers? So have they been prepped and prepared for kind of what that might look like? Is it going to be the same system? This is a question I got quite a bit in person last week when I was volunteering from retired teachers who are still subbing in our district. So that's the first question.
Yes, Mr. Johnson-Hosmer, thanks for the question. Yeah, we are working to finalize guidance now for our substitute teachers. We do anticipate needing them, ultimately face-to-face, but as well as online. And we know that some will be prepared to be able to do that. So we're working through some procedures now to reach out to subs in particular and give some guidance and see who is able to support the remote learning needs also.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
The second question is for anybody in academics, I guess. Also a question I got quite a bit last Friday when volunteering from parents. Or is it going to be up to each school, or are we going to talk to, we meaning the district, talk to parents about support around absences? Ms. Scott alluded to or asked a direct question about if students can't attend class, but the other question is not just for elementary school students, but for our older students who are managing their own online time. And so I'm curious, this is going to be very different for parents. Speaking as a high school parent, I would know if she was physically not taken to school because I take her there. That's not going to be the same because I'm working full time if she isn't attending or reviewing any online lessons. So I'm just curious about guidance for both teachers to responding to that, but also for parents in terms of managing that, because I think missing online is going to be a little bit more unique than in person.
Thank you for the question, Ms. Johnson-Hosler. And yes, I think first of all, we have been working in collaborating with our student information systems team in terms of the procedural process and the technical side of how we're going to take attendance when students are not in person. And so for one thing, we're having to kind of redefine what it means to attend and participate. And as you might imagine, that definition is a little bit broader than is typically the case. We have just in the last couple of weeks received some guidance from DPI at the state level about the parameters that we can work within. And so we've shared some initial guidance to our principals just in the last week or so around what this process looks like. I think as you've referenced, there are going to be challenges, especially early, with how we do that. And just to be totally transparent, one of the concerns that we have is in a fully online environment, right, by nature, to some degree, having a device is the mechanism and the means by which families would be able to show that participation and attendance is occurring. And so if there is a lack of a device or connectivity there, we're going to have to figure out a way to work through that challenge. But Michelle Woodson actually is part of the team that has been working on this. And so I'll defer to her for just a moment to share any additional details. But this is something that we are sharing guidance around, and we anticipate having to share some guidance very soon with parents, obviously, as well, so that we all understand and know what it means to attend classes in a non-traditional way.
Right. So before we get a follow-up, I guess I want to clarify, I'm also asking for both options, for both in-person and virtual, because it is still going to be different once we transition students in based on whatever way we transition them in. Parents may be able to get there for 2 days and the other 3 days. So I guess I'm curious if DPI has talked about distinctions in terms of how we reimagine, if you will, being present for school, attending class or not. Will it be different for virtual versus in person? Because I think both have the very similar challenges in this new environment.
So I'm going to answer that the best way I know how. Based on what I'm aware of at this current point in time, DPI is providing 2 new codes for us. One is about how you're present in person, and the other is about how you're present in a virtual environment. So those 2 codes will be available to us. I can say that it is not essential for a student to necessarily log into a synchronous instructional model to be able to be counted present. A student is also able to submit an assignment, and or we've encouraged that teachers do reach out to students if they don't see them in their synchronous environments, that they will reach out to them or other staff members to just check in on them. If they have a 2-way communication, even if it's via telephone, they are able to count those students present for that day. I don't have any further clarity with regards to the in-person piece of that from DPI at this point, but we are getting new updates literally almost every day.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I figured as much, but it's the one thing that we brought up early on, but haven't really revisited as we're now actually actually already have students going to school in Wake County right now. So I was curious if we had any further guidance from DPI on that. The last question I have is, again, back to our educators. Very similarly, in the presentation, you all talked about the workday exchange, but I'm also curious, do we have guidance from DPI on teacher absences and how, because again, it's another piece of information I think it's important that we're able to communicate as soon as we have guidance, because I do feel like teachers being out has a lot of different ways that that's going to happen this year. I mean, given we're in the midst of COVID, sickness and illness is going to look different. We're going to have, as a parent, we're definitely going to have a lot of different fears as we approach flu season on top of COVID. So just thinking through ways, have we been able to get guidance on talking to teachers about their own absences? Because we all know, as a spouse of an educator, I have lots of concerns about how we deal with substitutes for educators. And by that, I mean teachers' responsibilities for doing that.
So I'm not sure we've received specific guidance from the state, but we've worked really hard as an HR department to get flexibility for teachers so that they don't have to take leave when they're out. We've communicated a little bit about the federal leave. Recently, we've been able to determine that teachers who have to quarantine, for example, while they have the contagious disease policy that they can take advantage of, if they can actually telework and support students, they wouldn't have to take leave at all. So we're trying to make sure that when teachers are well enough to work, even if they have to be at home, they're allowed to do that without having to take leave. And then obviously there are leave options if folks are too sick for any reason that would normally kick in. I don't know if that completely answers your question, but I feel like we've been very attentive to trying to find flexibility for teachers, knowing that it's going to be a very different year in terms of teacher absences.
Thank you. I mean, you definitely answered, I'm guessing, as much as you have to answer now. And again, it's, I think well, I guess I shouldn't say it's less for me, but I guess it does technically apply to my household, that the more guidance we can give to teachers, I believe, especially before. I don't have a young child, but I think I would probably be a little bit more worried if I had a younger child as we approach COVID.
Right, I understand. Thanks.
I would be remiss if I did not say this, because my day job is about people taking care of themselves. And so I also know that teachers already come to school when they're not feeling well, as I call it, BC, before COVID. And I also know now, working from home, I probably work, well, I already worked about 60 hours, but I work way more and my day doesn't end because I'm in my house. And so, I just think that's something to also, I believe, is less about a policy in HR, but more about, principals, but more work around how we talk about the climate of how we take care of ourselves during COVID. Because there are going to be needs to follow up with students and parents far more frequently than we did before, for all teachers, I believe, in supporting the social and emotional well-being. But I also don't want teachers to think that our expectation, and by our, I mean the climate that we set, not the words that we say, that there's an expectation is that they work through whatever they or the people in their house are dealing with. And again, I don't think that's about anything we do at the district level, but just another communication to the climate that we create at the building level and the expectations.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Johnson-Hostler. And Ms. Cushman, I just got your message. I know you had some additional time left, but you're good. Your question was asked.
Yes, sir. Monica, Ms. Johnson-Hostler just did a great job summarizing. Thank you. So I'm good.
Thank you. I have one brief question, and that is regarding childcare. I know that, I guess this is for Mr. Simmons. I heard in the presentation that we are providing an option for our employees. I just wanted to ask, has there any progress being made in terms of affordable options for our parents and community? I know that there was some work that we were trying to do with the corporate community to garner some resources and that sort of thing. So I was wondering if there's any progress around affordable options for parents.
And thank you for that question. Yes, there has been progress. I will not say that it's done. So We may come calling to answer your question. The collaborative may come calling for more support. I do anticipate that this week, possibly as soon as tomorrow, WakeHead Partnership will put up a site that parents can access, which with all of the providers. And at that point, parents will be working with the individual providers, and the price points will be determined when they, when they get in touch with them. As we had said before, our goal from the beginning has been to offer a severely reduced, if not free, for families that qualify for subsidized meals, and then below market rates for those that do not.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. We're almost out of time. I've got perhaps time for one quick question from Mrs. Cash and Dr. Martin. If you have a quick question, we've got time for one more from each of you.
I'm sorry, my question was asked as well, so thank you.
Okay, Dr. Martin.
Thank you. I guess, my question, and it really is, I think, a request for additional data, is for an update on our staffing. We have heard teachers saying they're going to retire because of not coming back, not feeling safe to come back into the classroom. I've heard of teachers just saying the risk is too high. We always have a normal turnover. I don't know what the return is going to be. All of that on top of the fact that remote instruction is generally more personnel intensive. And then when we try to do the remote plus in person, to try to do both increases the workload. To Ms. Johnson-Hostler's last point, we really do need to respect the work of our staff, and not just, and as an educator, it never ends. And so when the challenge gets higher, we usually just work more. We heard this concern specifically with a number of the spec ed teachers feeling like, we can't normally, we are already challenged with the number of students that we deal with on a regular basis. As we go to the PPE and other safety precautions, any one individual is not going to be able to work with as many people. So all indicators, as far as I can tell, point toward a need for more staff. But I'm hearing us largely working in a finite staff model. And then so I wonder about, how do we get more staff? How do we deal with the finite staff model? And do we even have the staff that we would have had in a prior year with respect to hiring and retirement? So that's information that probably can't be answered just right away, but I think that's really critical information that we need as a board to have confidence that the system has the staff to be able to work effectively, and not just layer additional responsibility on existing staff.
I'll just say quickly, Dr. Martin, that we'll pull some of that information that we don't have in terms of numbers and comparisons to previous years. I can answer quickly that at this point in time, there's not a windfall of additional resources, human resources that comes with this. There's a little bit that has come from CARES funding at the state level to support some additional counselors or social workers. We have a more substantial request that we are making for that from the county commissioners. But these dollars that we're talking about and these funds are not recurring dollars. They're one time. They're likely to be contract positions, not actual MOEs that the district gets. So, I mean, that continues to be a need. I think I said it a couple of meetings ago. For every $1 of resource that we might be getting, there's probably $10 worth of need. And that is something that we have to acknowledge. There are certain places and times when we are asking the existing staff to not just do different, but in some cases possibly more. And I think that is, we probably do need to leverage that as a district for not only recognizing what our staff do every day and how they show up, but for demanding that our schools be funded at a level that is actually appropriate for what our needs are.
Completely agree. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, board members, for your questions, your thoughtfulness, staff for your responses as well. We certainly appreciate the update and thank you all for the work that has gone into the planning and position us to be as successful as we can be as we reopen our schools. So with that, that brings our work session to a close. We will now shift, and again, thank all that have participated. Thank the community for chiming in and listening. We will transition over to our board meeting and get started at about 5:35 and allow folks to transition to the other link and take any personal comfort breaks that you might need at this point, and we'll get started at about 5:35. Thank you all for participating, and we'll see you on the other side.